Welcome everyone on behalf of Science for Democracy to the second session, the afternoon session of the event, Human Rights Centered AI Design. Thanks for the people that are here at the House of Europe in The Hague, and for those that are following online, both on YouTube and on the Howspace platform that we are using to follow and take part in the event. We will now start the conclusive session of this event that is organized by Science for Democracy in collaboration with the Consumers Empowerment Project, P-Cube, Sales, and Claire. And I will now leave the floor to Franco Donati, researcher in industrial ecology at Leiden University, member of Science for Democracy, and one of the key sparkles in organizing this event that had this morning the first session on the interdisciplinary and political challenges of artificial intelligence. I will let Franco introduce the session that follows, which is a roundtable with some discussants, some of them connected online, others in person, and we encourage all the participants, particularly online, to use the comment section and the questions that Franco had prepared to have a collaborative and live conversation that will help us to then go toward the conclusion of the event. For those of you that are following online but are based in The Hague, I remember that you can either join us at the House of Europe or at 5:30 at our networking event at Caffè Restaurant Schlemmer, where we will have with Marco Cappato a goodbye drink after this long day of actions. The floor to Franco Donati for the round table.
Okay, thank you, Virginia, and it's very exciting to be here. Thank you for the speakers. I will introduce you shortly, and thank you for being all of you here. This is pretty nice to actually being able to organize this type of events and hold them also in hybrid format where people from online and presently they can participate to this type of discussions that are crucial for the future of artificial intelligence in general and its applications in our society. The focus of this panel will be that we would like to have some document at the end of this, some ideas of some takeaways of how we want to move forward in terms of policy, where we need to go from here. And we'll touch upon discussions on open data, data protection, artificial intelligence and health, and democracy in general. We have 5 speakers that are joining us today. We have Professor Klaus Heine, who's Professor of Law and Economics at the Erasmus School of Law in Rotterdam. We have Isabelle Hupont Torres, who's Scientific Project Officer at the Joint Research Center HUMAINT project. I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. We have Sascha Marschang, who's Senior Advisor at European Hospital and Healthcare Foundation. We have Giralda Chiverton, who's a regional lead with Howspace. And then Federica Paolucci, who's a Ph.D. student at the Bocconi University of Milan. Before we begin, I also wanted to bring the attention of some of the answers that were brought forward by some of the participants that are online on the questions on the perspective of big challenges and opportunities that these people see in the expansion of artificial intelligence systems. And with the hope that actually this could fuel some of the conversations in the panel as well. And some of the opportunities that were brought up are technological and development, technological development that leads to better research and understanding of phenomena, ergo broader knowledge, or knowledge, education, and more information about law in this area in general is one of the challenges. Some indicated that there's a particular interest in application of research, but also who's going to make and implement rules concerning artificial intelligence. And also questions of, is artificial intelligence development moving too fast for the bureaucratic apparatus to actually regulate it and make sure that it actually benefits society at large? Challenges of education, so opportunity in education, and what are the challenges related to explainability, bias, and fairness? So having said this, I would also like to give the opportunity to Isabella Torres before we begin with the questions on making a short presentation of what she would like to talk about. So if she's ready, Isabelle, the floor is yours.
Yes, I am. I'm trying to share my screen, hopefully in a second. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, well, hi everyone. I'm happy to be here, even if it is in virtual mode. My name is Isabelle Hupont. I work as a scientific project officer at the European Commission, more particularly in the HUMAINT group. So in HUMAINT, I hope I'll be, yeah. So in HUMAINT, what we do is objective science, of course, for understanding the impact of artificial intelligence on human behavior, how AI impacts humans, but also how we humans impact AI. And we are a multidisciplinary team. In my case, I am an engineer, but I work with also social scientists, mathematicians, people from also economy and experts in education and so on. So because we really think that multidisciplinarity is the key towards the full understanding of AI. So we study the risks and the opportunity that current AI systems offer. In the case of risks, we focus on safety risks and risks to fundamental rights. This is aligned to the AI Act that my colleague Irina has presented this morning. We also work on technical stuff, of course. So we develop methodologies for what is called trustworthy AI, which is something that is becoming more and more popular in the good sense, because trustworthy AI, it's about fighting discrimination in AI, fostering transparency practices, and including human oversight practices. And also an important part of our job is to focus on real world scenarios of AI. Where is AI applied nowadays and how, and in which fields? So I would like to start by this video. This video is a facial processing algorithm. It's not a facial processing system. It's just an algorithm that extracts information from my face. Where are some points around my face, where I'm looking at, my head pose, if I'm looking to the left, to the right, some micro expressions, which are these things that are activating to the right. It can be if I am lowering my eyebrows or if I'm smiling or blinking, for instance. No, this is raw information. It is not taking any kind of decision or interpreting that because I lower my eyebrows, I'm surprised, okay? This is an algorithm. Of course, for instance, we could do many things with these algorithms. This is not the case in this example. In this example, the system is not identifying me. It's just extracting information from my face, but in an anonymous way. It could be identifying me. In this case, we were talking about biometrics. It could also be detecting if I'm wearing red glasses or if my hair is blonde. But this is an algorithm. So what really matters is what we do with this algorithm, which system we build upon this algorithm. So this is, this is the way we like to represent. In this case, it's trustworthy facial processing, but it could be any kind of trustworthy AI application. So we have made this publication in the journal Nature as a scientific report. And there are 7 requirements for trustworthy AI. You probably know most of them. And these are the pillars upon any AI system should be built. It includes human agency, oversight, technical robustness, transparency. It must be transparent. Also have good data governance. It must have a good positive social impact, be accountable and non-discriminate, and do not discriminate people. And the algorithms, what we call the facial processing tasks, is the algorithm should be built taking this into account by design. Not after the model is built by a scientist in the Stanford University or whatever university, but by design. Really, when we start thinking about building the algorithm, we have to take this into account. But what really matters, and actually the European AI Act, for instance, focuses on the application, not on the algorithm itself. The application is much more than an algorithm. And this would be my key takeaway message, no, for today. We have the algorithms, but then we have to take into account which end users are going to use it, which interaction mechanisms are we going to provide these users so that they can override system decisions, or they can control some thresholds to better suit their needs. There is also a context of use, the geographical context, behavioral context, and also there are operational data and data captured in real time by sensors. If we are talking about face recognition, it could be a camera. And these data are working in real time and are very different from the data that are used in the lab for training the algorithms. So we have to focus. I think that nowadays you can find a lot of academic papers or studies, scientific studies focusing on algorithms, but very few of them focus on applications. And this is actually what we are trying to fight now in my group, in HUMAINT. We are really trying to establish the landscape of applications, of AI applications. And in this work in particular, we focused on facial processing. So any kind of analysis of the face. So just to give a couple of numbers, no, about the importance of this study, if it to serve as a good practice. We reviewed about 4,000 scientific papers. We identified almost 200 companies having real products in the market that use some kind of facial analysis technique. We compiled 60 real-world applications, that is, applications that are in the market and being deployed by many stakeholders, including law enforcement agencies, for instance. And for each of these 60 real-world applications identified, we assessed their applications areas where they are applied, the risk level they have according to the AI Act, and the key companies that are putting these applications in the market. So this allowed us to identify limitations and challenges that have to be overcome very urgently. You probably know most of them. The most important one is documentation. Application systems in the market are not well documented, and there is a need to document thoroughly these systems because it might cause disinformation. Also, you know the fairness problem, facial recognition systems that do not perform the same way depending on the ethnical or the skin color of the individuals. This is the origin of these problems is on data, and data sets are used to train these algorithms, and these data sets are usually crawled from the internet. We looked for faces in the internet and we collect them to train these algorithms. So perhaps the bias comes from us humans. No? If these data sets are biased, it means that the place where we find them, which is the internet, is biased as well. So we need a switch in our minds. Also, another interesting finding was that this kind of AI systems in general tend to be more and more distributed. Distributed means that they are more and more large, deployed at very large scale in several places, in a country, in a city. So this distribution implies some security and privacy concerns because data, biometric data or personal data might be traveling from one place to another over the internet. So much more research on techniques such as federated learning, visual cryptography have to be carried out, and also try to focus on the data minimization using the least amount of data strictly necessary. And also we found out that there is a need for having operational evaluation benchmark to evaluate these systems, not just evaluate these systems in a lab, which is done right now. We need to move to operational setups, of course controlled, to see how the accuracy, the performance of these systems decays when moving to operational settings, which is usually a big problem for many AI applications. So, well, this and my next slides are an enumeration of the 60 use cases we identified. Just a couple of things I would like to highlight. There are systems that are no risk, that are minimal risk. This is why they have the green light. This is according to the AI Act. We all know we can unlock our mobile phones with our face. This is a minimal risk. However, there are systems that are high risk, and this is, of course, high risk or even prohibited, which is the black dot. This is mostly mass biosurveillance, as it was mentioned in the earlier panel. So of course we have to be aware that these systems exist, and these are the systems where we have to put more effort on transparency, or these 7 pillars, no, for trustworthy AI. But also it's very important to highlight that there are facial processing applications that are not so popular. They are not well known by the wide public. Also, they are not so present in the market, but they are very useful. They are applications for good, let's say. This includes using affective robots as companion for elderly person, or to help children with autism to understand emotions and work their emotions. Also pain detection. Pain can be detected from facial expressions, and this is super useful for patients that are in a hospital and suffer pain, but they cannot express their pain because they have dementia or because they're an elder person, like they cannot speak. So identifying the phases of pain and having an alarm saying disclosing about this issue is super important application. Also visual live logging for persons with Alzheimer, that this can say that what happened during the day and aid and be used as a memory aid. Also for blind people to know what's going on in a scene and who is around them. Speech recognition for voice impaired, face guided communication for moving a wheelchair, for instance. So there are very strong facial processing applications that are not face recognition or mass surveillance, and that deserve to be here because they really help the society. And of course, they need to be regulated. Regarding this other issue I mentioned regarding the lack of well documentation practices for documented AI system, what AI systems do and what they should not do, and so on. In HUMAINT, we are now working on a unified catalog of use cases, and we are using a standardized a standard called UML, it's Unified Modeling Language, to model these use cases in a machine-readable format. And the interesting thing of using this kind of standardized approaches is that you can explicitly say which is the intended purpose of the system, which is the intended application area, and forbid other application areas. And especially say the misuses. For instance, let's imagine that we have this smart shooting camera, a very common use case. You have the smart camera that only shoots the picture when everyone is smiling in front of the camera. This use is naive. We have probably all used them, but there are also misuses. For instance, it was used in Japan for the workers of a company. When they were coming to the office, they were forced to smile before entering to the office. It was supposed to be to foster the good ambience in the workplace and so on. But these workers perceived that their emotions were being manipulated. So this is a misuse, and this we can document. So this is why documentation practices are so important. So my takeaway messages are: put the focus on systems, not on algorithms. Analyze the risks, but also analyze the opportunities that AI system offers. We need to also to incentivize data sharing practices, because this lack of good data quality, good data is really a problem, especially for SMEs that cannot collect as much data as big techs. And these data sharing practices could be good also to guarantee the trustworthiness of the data sources. We need documentation, and we need to develop operational benchmarks for evaluating AI systems. And this is everything from my side, at least to the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hupont. Are there any reaction on this presentation that you would like to address at this moment? Otherwise, we move forward to the questions. Okay, perfect. I'm sure some some of these points in this very comprehensive and interesting presentation will also be used further into the discussion. But so we'll get right to it. And the first questions that we have is, what does it mean to develop and deploy artificial intelligence systems that have a human-centered perspective? And I will start with Professor Klaus, if you would like to express a few words on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether I'm the right candidate to answer such a more technical question, but from a more legal point of view, I would question in general, what shall that mean, human-centered approach in legal terms? It is a political term, and it is a value judgment which we may share, but to make this, so to say, graspable in legal terms, that is another question. For sure, the AI Act tries to deal with this question very lengthy, and it comes also back in other documents. But giving a simple answer to this question, I feel overburdened. Yeah. But it may hint to something else. What I felt the whole day here when I observed a little bit the scene, that we have to deal with a lot of words, definitions, which are yet not spelled out in the. Now I have to look at you for the simple reason that you are in the room. That the AI Act has many definitions which are yet not nailed down. And then what is critical is then shifted to an annex that I do understand for lawmaking why this is made, but there's still a lot of work to do to spell it out. I'm not 100% sure whether I gave a good answer to this specific question, but I tried my best.
No, it's an excellent answer, and it actually provides some points of further discussion. I also want to encourage everybody to pitch in if you have something to contribute to the question. But indeed, I mean, it indicates there is a divide between what things mean in legal terms, and what means for society as well. What people perceive that something that is human-centered might mean. What is the benefit that they receive? From the other speakers, do you have what is your opinion in this on this discussion specifically? Please feel free to take your space.
When you say human-centered, that's kind of the point I got stuck on. You and I had a discussion earlier about I traveled recently abroad, and I won't say the country, but when I came, I'm sorry, when I came, when I entered the country and I had to show my passport, they did a retina scan. They scanned my face, my biometrics, I guess. And then when I was leaving, I didn't need my passport or my boarding pass to leave. It literally scanned my face, and I was able to go through. So, I mean, I think when we're talking about the event today, that's the area that's the most sensitive. How far are we going to take collecting data using AI? Was my passport not sufficient? Were my fingerprints not sufficient? So it went a step further than that. So I think when it comes to human-centered, it's depending on what it's used for. Because Dr. I forget her name, Hupont said, it can be used for good things. I mean, if a patient has dementia and they can't express that they're in pain, it can be used for good things. So it depends on what it's being used for. If it's being used for good, I mean, I welcome it. I think that there are really good uses for AI. But then there's the other part that could end up trampling on rights, how far are we going to go, collecting data to do so. So that's kind of the view I have on the human-centered version of AI.
Thank you. Yeah, and this highlights something like a point that we actually were discussing earlier as well, is to what extent the risks that a society is incurring in the use of some artificial intelligence perspective outweigh the benefits. You know, because it's always a balance. I can imagine, for example, with facial recognition, there is a discussion on public safety that the people want to be ensured, or the government, anyways, would like to promote. But at the same time, which risks does it come, and how can we mitigate those risks? Dr. Hupont would like to actually address some of this.
Yeah, there is always a trade-off between risks, benefits, and opportunities. And before deploying any kind of AI system, we have to make this exercise to put everything in the balance and to ask citizens also to explain, to be transparent with anyone about how the system will be used, how data will be used. Also include this multidisciplinarity perspective. I mean, not only putting engineers deploying these systems, but also the civil society representatives, also experts, psychologists. I mean, involve a lot of people in this exercise. Up to now, it's true that these systems were mostly deployed by engineers, no? And in the few cases that, if we all think about these large-scale face recognition, which is not one of the most common use cases, it's very rarely deployed, especially in Europe, only in case of terrorist threat or this kind of occasions. We need to ensure that it is only deployed if really needed.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, it's quite interesting take. And how do we like this? This actually touches upon a discussion on human rights. Like it creates a bridge between the technical discussion and the human rights perspective. So how do we protect citizens in a way from the misuses of artificial intelligence, but also how do we promote public participation in artificial intelligence, but also to facilitate, to improve the life of citizens, overall. I would like to address actually the question is what challenges inequal treatment and inclusion of these systems do we have, and how can we mitigate them in this sense? I don't know if Federica Paolucci feels like contributing to this point.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And let me say that I'm very happy and grateful to be present, even if online today, to this wonderful panel. And I hope you can hear me fine. About the equal treatment, let me address a point before answering this question. We were speaking about good and bad uses of AI, and I actually don't believe a lot in this definition, because I think that as per everything, it's not bad face recognition per se, which is also part of my PhD thesis. So it's a topic that I'm very passionate about. But how democracy and how human rights engages with this sort of technology. An example for me is, for instance, what, and since Marco Cappato is present here, which I highly support in Italy, his work, it's the use, for instance, of digital signature. Like, we can use it, but for some point, and I'm saying something strong, we fall out in the justification that for something is to be used and for something else is still not protected by law. So this is the sort of balance that in law we are failing to make in terms of usages. This comes, of course, the equal treatment, because with the data protection side of the story, every biometric data is actually a special category of data. But as you know, some specific categories, I would say, are more difficult than others. For instance, women are highly discriminated in this sense, and also other categories. And inclusion, moreover, should be enforced. How? Basically, as someone was saying before, making the algorithm and the AI learning before putting it into the market, before actually thinking about the bad and the not so bad, I would say, usages of this technology. Because only if we take into account this human rights, I would say, balance before we actually employ this technology, this is the only possible way we can foster inclusion and equal treatment.
Thank you. No, it's a very interesting and broad response in this sense. And what are the I wonder in this sense how we can mitigate also from a legal perspective some of these misuses or some of these negative effects, if there is even like a legal response to this question. Professor Klaus, would you?
I would say there is a legal response, and maybe it even fits with the ambitions of this initiative and all the concerns which are put forward here, because we may have a paradigmatic shift in the legal treatment of this problem, and that is, would it not be an idea to make all data public ownership? All data are public ownership, and then for specific purposes, use rights are given to firms, but those use rights could also be retained. And now we say, okay, cannot imagine that, but we had that in Europe before, and that was in the 1950s, when the high technology of nuclear physics came together with nuclear material, and there was also a long-standing debate about how to regulate that. Shall we have the forces of the private market with a lot of regulations around, or is that maybe too risky, and we should have it in public ownership? And from that point on, Jean Monnet was one of the proposers of that, to make any nuclear material in the European Union a public good, which is under the control of Euratom. And Euratom gives then, according to the critical levels of the material, ownership rights, not use rights to it. And that can also be an endless use right. But if something would go wrong there, also in competition, then it could be in principle retained. So this is not to come because the AI Act and all that is already too far to come up with an alternative. But we have one, and that is public ownership, and we can retain the data to the public whenever it is needed.
And do you see some and please also the people feel free to contribute to pitch in, but are there specific data might actually require specific application might actually require different challenges, different approaches to this. For example, I can imagine that with medical data, medical application, this could be quite sensitive. Of course, also for nuclear application, there is a national interest and safety issue, security issue. But is this type of a system also will also be applicable for in medical application? If so, how?
No, the idea would be fundamental. All data which are generated are owned by the public. So this is super general, and then a more fine-grained regime has to come. For example, for the medical sector, what is possible there and what is not. But it would bring the citizen and so to say the public will in a stronger position vis-a-vis the companies or the hospitals which are yet kind of owners of that. That does not mean the problems have disappeared, but it is a paradigmatic alternative to what we have yet. And I could now expand and talk some hours of it. It would also solve the problem that small and medium-sized companies have so much struggle to get access to it. Because at the moment, all the data repositories are owned by big companies. And these big companies are certainly not in Europe. And they are behind the veil of the company. And if you have this different regime, you would not solve this problem to access to data by the help of competition law, which is ineffective at the moment. Therefore, we have all these other discussions. But you would change it by a switch in the ownership regime. So this is the big alternative, which is on the table, but obviously not on the table of the European Commission, because it would need some brave policymakers to come forth with those suggestions, and those fundamental switches in the legal regime only happen every 100 years, and obviously at the moment the time is not ripe. So
I want to comment real quick. I think when everyone heard data and public, everyone kind of, I think I understand what you mean, because we had a discussion before about larger companies having access to data that smaller companies don't. But when it comes to like medical things, like I'm someone, I don't even accept cookies online. So if a website wants me to accept cookies, I'm just gonna exit the website, you know? So I'm that kind of person where like my data, my privacy is so important. So when it comes to medical, even more so. So I think like when it comes to that, it depends on the type of data. So if we're talking about buying habits, you know, that companies have access to, then why not let the smaller companies also have access to that if it's something that's already out there? But when it comes to like, to me, when it comes to like more sensitive things, of course not. So I think that's what you mean. So I'm just trying to clarify that, but just wanted to make that, ask that question, and also.
Wonderful, I have to reply immediately a little bit. Think about the case of Iceland. And Iceland sold all the genome data to a company. And the interesting thing is now, how is in Iceland on the constitutional level the individual protected? Yeah, and you get a totally different thinking about it. It is public ownership does not mean that you as an individual are stripped all of your data and you have no rights, but it leads to a different thinking about it. That is a little bit, but now I'm.
Maybe someone else.
No,
Maybe
no,
someone else
it's
wants
good.
to.
Thank you.
Someone else wants to add something to that.
No, it seems fine.
I
No,
see
please,
Isabelle,
yeah.
I see Isabelle.
Yeah,
Please,
sorry.
Isabelle.
I fully agree with this conversation, this discussion. And actually, I didn't develop too much this point in my presentation because it was too long. But yeah, so data is the new gold in artificial intelligence. So the more data you have, the better is your algorithm and therefore your system. So it is as simple as this, no? The more data, the best is the algorithm. This is the magic of deep learning and all these artificial intelligence techniques that are being increasingly developed. So it is the rush for data. And I was part of an SME before joining the European Commission, and I saw this problem, no, personally. SMEs struggle with data. Why? There are two kinds of database: private databases that are owned by tech giants because they have the users and they have the community of users. They can gather a lot of data from their users, so you cannot access this data. And then you have what we call the public databases that are mostly academic efforts, very well-known the MIT, Stanford University, Cambridge University. They have even some private companies at a smaller scale. Microsoft has opened some data, and we call these public databases. And these databases can be used for academic purposes, but not for commercial purposes. So SMEs are harmed because they cannot use public databases, because public databases are only for academic uses. And of course, they cannot access to these tech giant databases because it is their trade secret and the magic of their algorithms. So what can do SMEs? So perhaps it's not a matter of opening data to everyone. Perhaps it's just a matter of creating controlled data spaces with agreements between public institution, public-private institution, let these SMEs access data, but in a very controlled way and following certain specific rules that should be controlled. So we need standards for this. We need regulations for these data spaces. If I'm not wrong, I'm not an expert on regulations, but if I'm not wrong, we have this Data Act and also some European data spaces that are starting to be deployed for this. So yeah, I really think that data, sharing data, controlling how data is shared and making SMEs be closer to this data is really a key towards the democratization of AI.
No, that's thank you, and I can imagine also there is aside from also the issue between access from private enterprises to data that might be available to scientists. There is also a big divide between people who are able to access in the northern hemisphere and people who are not able to access data in the southern hemisphere. One of my fears actually of this is actually that there is going to be an even further driving of a digital divide between these two sides of the world, yeah, creating a much bigger competition that will be able to exert from the north in comparison with the south, and creating even more divides. How can we ensure, in a way, that artificial intelligence systems and the digital technologies that are associated with them, because that's how actually we actually can provide data for the systems, can also benefit or being deployed at a similar rate also in less fortunate areas of the world in comparison with Europe at the least.
Yeah, I think we are at risk of perpetuating even more the biases that we already have in society. So it's good that we raise this question, and we are on time to tackle it from the very beginning and to put solutions to these big challenges.
Thank you. And I think, sorry, I cannot see all their hands. I think, was it Federica?
Yeah,
yes,
if you can step in. I think this issue with both open data and basically creating a standard for the deployment and usage of AI is very much connected with a quite old debate, which is access to internet, and I would say access to technology, which is something that in Europe is still a debate. It's a debate still going on, and we are facing many issues on actually applying these principle that seems so understandable, that seems so easy to catch it. Since we can speak about AI, we can speak about risk of facial recognition, but still there is a huge number of the world population which doesn't have access to internet. So this is an issue not only for their participation to debate or social networks or whatever, but in particularly for the social divide. And this comes, in my opinion, with the debate on sustainability, because there is a lot going on sustainability in terms of climate change, which is a major issue of my generation, I believe. But in particular, I would say a sustainability of technology in relation to the climate change, because once again, we are speaking about AI, we're speaking about databases, and we must be aware that those databases are highly difficult to be sustainable for the climate. So I believe that one path for the future would be not only to establish a standard, which Europe is trying to do so with the AI Act, which is not only risk preventing, it is also about creating a standard and creating sort of applicable standard. Maybe it will have the effect of GDPR that stimulated many regulation all over the world, things California, things Canada or Brazil. But in my opinion, we should also consider the idea of sustainability, once again, in terms of climate, in terms of technology, and in terms of society, only taking into account this that many philosophers now are very catching, let's say, the green and the blue will be the future of this application of AI.
Thank you. And from a perspective of actually, I think, I don't know actually, before I start talking, because then I get excited and I continue talking, but would anybody like to actually contribute and have some questions in the meantime? Or either from the people online or from the audience?
I have a couple of questions. It was very interesting to me, this idea of data as a public good. I think that maybe we should also think about the anonymization of data, because sometimes it could be easier to use big data. In fact, as a public good if they are anonymized, and that could make them in full availability for states, public service, but even SME, because then we could not have the same level of risk for privacy reason. Even if it's not that easy to say, well, anonymous data are not always anonymous. I had the experience, we collected 1 million signatures online for Italian referendum on cannabis and euthanasia, and we created a huge open data database, and we delivered it in the public domain as open data. But still we had to aggregate some data, because even if those data were anonymized, there could have been a way of, for example, if an old lady, a 90 years old lady signed the referendum in a small city, even if there was no name, but in reality you could have identified this lady. So it's not that easy on one side. On the other side, one of the problems for your idea of public data is the exceptional power that sometimes states can have on data. secret agencies, secret service agency, and so on, which brings also to the problem of elimination of data. In the panel of today, the lady from European Digital Rights said, with some kind of data, the only secure way of treating them is not collecting them, which on one side seemed a little bit too absolutist way of thinking. But on the other side, if you think that police and secret services agency, they have exceptional powers on data, on the possibility of using data also outside of the ordinary law, this brings a very concrete problem. Last suggestion, is there room for thinking about private artificial intelligence? For example, I could think that all my personal data, every medical move, social network behavior, and I could trust putting them in an artificial intelligence system where I will have the access. I will be the only one. It could be a public system of artificial intelligence, but used on a private base. I know that I'm not clear in explaining this example, but if I had my artificial intelligence on my side,
and monetize it,
maybe monetizing, or maybe instructing my artificial intelligence in helping me defending myself against other artificial intelligences from companies and the state and so on. Could be this a model that it could find some link to with reality, because in that case I could trust this system, because I could be helped, for example, in overcoming my own bias, but not because a company is exploiting my bias to manipulate my behavior, but my personal artificial intelligence could help me to overcome my bias in my own behavior, or defend myself to aggressive stance from other systems. Maybe it's not very clear, but I'm sorry.
Okay, I will try to answer, but only a very short. All what you said made sense, because it's the typical follow-up questions. One is, how secure would be those public data be? I made already the tangent a little bit to Euratom, which is an independent organization. It must be shielded from single governments, a little bit like an independent European central bank. One can question how independent it is, but the governance idea is clear here. Then you had the distinction between those highly sensitive data, private data in a hospital, and the other is more technical data, and where I also would say Isabelle had that a little bit, where one can convert private data via anonymization into technical data. And technical data means data you are producing, for example, when you are driving a car. So then the next follow-up question is what you had at the end. The opposite of making something public. Here I have to say, even in a hospital, you could say that it is for the common good of health of future generations. You have kind of donate your data to the common good. You can also make those argumentations. So the opposite governance model would be privacy, full privacy, and it is what you said, your own AI, and then you are selling your data if you like. But industry is also not very happy about this model. For your car is now collecting all kinds of data, and when you bought your car, you also signed that all the data go to the car company. And then the car company has, car companies have meanwhile a struggle with the insurance industry, because the insurance industry would also be very happy to get those data, and are now in a coalition with consumer protection to get also a grip on those data, but the car industry, the manufacturing industry has no interest in those data. So, but anyway, the opposite model would be a strong privatization of data, and in the US you have even companies where you can sell your own genome data, and then you become also an owner in the company, and if the company makes some money, then you would also get it. So you can also privatize it. So and now before I come to an end, the worst you can make in those terms is that you have hybrid models, and I would say for some political reasons, historical reasons, and because we have some past dependencies, the European Union with its legislation is somewhere hybrid, and is making the best out of, very pragmatic what we had this morning, make something out of it. But from a researcher's perspective, the hybrid model is the worst you can have. Also in technical terms, as we have seen this morning, and if I'm in a classroom and I have to do a hybrid teaching, then it is hell. That was my contribution here.
No, thank you. It reminds me a bit the discussion that has been had for a while on Facebook or social networks in general. There are critical communication infrastructure. Should we have a public option for it that is being provided by states in general? Because it's we rely so much on it, and actually we depend also on it for access to information that can sway our perception of democracy or perception of the world in general. And I wonder how artificial intelligence systems can be designed to prevent that there are kind of, not prevent, but can we be protected in a way from being manipulated into having specific ideas or not specific ideas, specific ideas about the world, for example? Or how can we prevent that that our democratic process is being too much influenced in a negative perspective from these systems? It's an open question, so please.
There is a hand raised by Professor Marschang.
Someone likes to have.
Thank you.
I'm happy to come
please.
in if I may.
Yes, please.
Although, of course, anything I can say is sort of like healthcare specific, but nonetheless, I think a lot of points that were made by Isabelle, for example, also linking the AI Act with the European Health Data Space, and I think also trying to take out of a little bit taking the science fiction element a little bit out of the discussion. I think that's really important when we think about democratizing AI and digital health technologies more broadly, and ensuring trustworthy and ethical use of these technologies. So for us, so I represent HOPE, which is the European Hospital and Healthcare Federation. So this is national public and private hospitals, but it's also owners of healthcare and hospital services. So this could be regions or governments in some cases as well. So even within that group, it's already quite diverse. And then you look at the many different functions that hospitals have, where healthcare providers, hospitals are employers, hospitals are obviously buildings as well. So the environmental aspects that were mentioned by someone before are also relevant when it comes to the deployment of new technology and AI in particular. It's all really complex. And for us, I guess, how can we democratize this debate? How can we ensure that the good intentions that I personally believe, and I'm sure most of the people I work with in Brussels as well, the good intentions that are there at the heart of it to make things trustworthy, secure, safe, patient-centric, et cetera, are actually fulfilled is obviously by trying to bring in those communities and affected stakeholders as much as possible. The problem being, however, that obviously technologies are being developed very quickly, and very often at the beginning, all of that is completely disjointed from health stakeholders. And usually it's through European projects or other types of initiatives that the two worlds are meeting and talking with one another. And often, of course, we realize, okay, we do speak different languages. We kind of mean the same thing. We want the same thing. We want better access to healthcare. We want to make routine tasks easier for healthcare professionals. We want to support, I don't know, obviously clinical diagnosis and decision-making. We'd like to improve administrative processes within hospitals so that continuity of care can become easier. We want to make sure that everyone has access to the relevant data so that we can avoid duplication of testing and all of these things. But yeah, unfortunately, I think very often the voice of the end user, and by the end user, I mean professionals, patients, managers, etc. It comes in sort of like as an add-on stakeholder consultation. Okay, yes, that's relevant, but the economic side of things then often wins out. And I think particularly in the health sector, we need to really prioritize health outcomes. We need to look at, as somebody said earlier, we need to look at the sustainability of the system, particularly coming out of the COVID crisis, now going into the energy crisis. What does that mean for hospitals, for example, where already we're operating with decreased budgets for many decades. We're operating in many countries with very low levels of health professionals who are available, and hospitals are struggling then to fill these gaps by recruiting from abroad, depleting workforces elsewhere. So it's a very complex system we're operating in. And I guess the introduction of artificial intelligence, as important as it is in areas that Isabelle mentioned and that I just mentioned, overall, it's we're probably not quite there yet to really embrace it in the large scale that probably will be done in the future, simply because there's no money, there are no resources, and things are complex. Skills need to be developed as well. Somebody hinted at the skills. So that's why I think opening up this debate today is really important, but opening up crucial decision-making processes. And I think Professor Heine also mentioned that these new pieces of legislation, whether it's the EHDS or the AI Act, they contain a lot of implementing acts and delegated acts and these kinds of things. So they're not fully finished yet. They will be discussed as we move along, as they're being transposed and implemented, and there need to be opportunities for us to co-shape these pieces of legislation. That's what comes to mind, but I don't know if that's really in response to any question here.
Thank you. Actually, I have a question concerning this, and it's in the sense that we essentially need to get people, different people involved, and actually put them in a position where their opinions are actually being implemented or taken up in a fair way in comparison with other interests in the implementation of these things. And it seems a little bit as if the legislative side kind of lags a little bit behind in kind of facing these type of issues. And I wonder whether actually there should be ethics committees, for example, that are constantly running on these issues, and whether these committees, if they should be implemented, should include different types of stakeholders that could that they represent different interests, in a kind of an affection of citizen assemblies in a way, but specific to a given goal of implementation of artificial intelligence.
I think one of the things I was thinking about as everyone was, discussing the different areas, health, data, AI. I just think of specific incidents that happened that really lead to the need, that show that there's a need for some kind of oversight with this. I think about, and some people may feel differently. If anyone has ever done a DNA test to see the background, I remember there was a case in the US where there was someone that committed a crime years before. He did a DNA test to test his background, and they found him through one of those companies. So I wonder how many people realize that this information is sold, or that the authorities have access to it. I mean, of course, they caught a criminal, but at the same time, you're looking at privacy, like how much, what's the balance there? Is it for is it allowed when it's for something good, for finding a criminal, or is it something that we should kind of shield people from altogether? I think that's the question for me. And also, like recently in the U.S. with the Roe versus Wade, there were kind of warning women about the health apps that tracking could be happening. So be careful with that. So when you're looking at breaches in privacy, that's kind of the big picture I'm kind of looking at when I thought of this event today. What's the balance here? Is it the data that the authorities are collecting that we're concerned about? Is it the data that companies are collecting that we're concerned about? Is it both? Is it kind of in between? So that's kind of leading to another question, I guess, for everyone.
Who feels like
If I may briefly jump in, I totally agree with this last comment. And I also believe that the issue with AI, this is maybe one of the mistakes, I will say, of the AI Act, is that we look a lot on the personal data issue injected in the AI, but the case of the reaction of Roe versus Wade and all the health and women, I would say, application that we're looking to at after that decision, they didn't all rely just on personal data. There were issues related to metadata and location data that were not a lot at all personal, but non-personal. So when we look at the AI, and this comes to something that was said before, joint effort, all stakeholder effort, not just on the sector, but also within authority. We have so many people speaking, of course, the Commission, the data protection authorities, but we need a joint effort to look at the issue in an horizontal level, because at least with the protection of fundamental rights, we need, I believe, an horizontal look on all the issues that we are tackling.
any reaction on this?
Yeah, if I may, yes, the AI Act is indeed conceived as horizontal by nature. And my colleague Irina said something very interesting this morning. I knew that, but I like the way she said it, and I took notes, so I will read it. The AI Act is one piece in a legal puzzle. The AI Act is not to be taken as a single law to be respected, as a single regulation to be compliant with. There is many other regulations that should be taken into account. For instance, there is an Annex 2. It is called Annex 2 in the AI Act that has specifically says that if the AI system is in a medical device, or is related to healthcare, then the healthcare regulation and medical devices regulations apply. So this would be my message, which is mirrored from the message of my legal colleague this morning, which is that the AI Act is one piece into a bigger legal puzzle. No?
If I may, I would just echo that, what Isabelle just said. I think the only thing is, like, currently I'm looking a lot at the AI Act in relation to the European Health Data Space, and the idea of the proposal for the European Health Data Space that was released earlier this year in May 2022 was to then sort of translate the AI relevant elements to healthcare and clarify a little bit more what would be acceptable or unacceptable related to AI and robot technologies in healthcare. And there you have, for example, I can just read it out. You have an article that says training, testing, and evaluating algorithms, including in medical devices, AI systems, and digital health applications, which is part of the so-called secondary uses of personal health data. So the research sphere of things. And this could be for public health, social security, quality and safety of care, of drugs and medical devices. It's very broad, is what I'm trying to say here. And you know, like it's maybe not the very best example of how a broader horizontal idea from the AI Act would then be translated into more sector-specific legislation. I know this is then, of course, as you said, Isabelle, it's connected to medical devices and in vitro diagnostics legislation, and it's related to the so-called Data Governance Act and cybersecurity features and all of that stuff. But it's still, it's very broad, and I think the initial reaction that we received from a lot of the health community stakeholders was a little bit disappointment on the AI side of things, because it kind of opens up the door to all kinds of uses, and we now need to make sure, as you said earlier, that this is really within the limits of the ethical principles that were agreed upon.
Thank you. There's also a question from or contribution from Marco Cappato.
I had a question about the relationship between open data policies and artificial intelligence or big data, because there is a possible paradox. I don't know if I'm wrong on that, but I am, we as HUMAINT and other group organization, very much in favor of open data. The fact that data that are paid by the citizens should be in the public domain in a way. But if then the algorithmic power, the possibility of exploiting mass data are, this power is only in the hand of big tech companies. Is there not the possibility that open data could paradoxically worsen, give even more power to big tech, because they would be the only one able to use in an algorithmic way, in an artificial intelligence way, those open data. Isn't this leading us to the need also, at a certain extent, of some public algorithms, not just public data? For example, if we put, I don't know, health data, maybe it's not the right example. You anonymize a huge amount of health data, and then you put them in the public domain as open data. But then the only computational power to exploit those data would be for big tech or health companies. But maybe this is leading us to the need of having government or the European Union or maybe a third agency in the, capable to use those data so that some services are created for the benefit of the user, not just for the benefit of the companies, and not always the benefit of the user in the health domain are the same than the benefit of the companies.
Can I say something on this very briefly? I think this is a huge debate also related to the topic of explanation of AI, which somehow it was regulated within the DMA while fostering the data portability. So the European Union is reacting on this polarization of data because basically digital platforms have more data than others, and this relates to surveillance capitalism and so on and so forth. They said, okay, but since you have all this data, other companies can access it and develop new algorithms from your data. So one way to do it technically is data portability. But as you mentioned, and this is very true because there are no strict standard on this already. The issue with the portability, at least till the DMA, was the fact that even if you can use it, many companies do not have the same standards. So for instance, not even company, but also users, you can ask for data portability, but maybe you don't have the proper, I would say, software to read it. So this might be a point, but at least for market purposes, the DMA is going in this direction in order to rebalance the polarization of datasets.
Thank you. I believe.
Yeah, I can also contribute a little bit because we are now going to the more fundamental questions, and you raised that somehow because we had since the beginning of this conference always in our mind that we have to regulate something. We might not share the same opinion about regulating, but the opposite of all that would be simply not regulating it. And you sketched out a scenario in which openness, even if it is meant for the best, leads in the end to something we would not like. And we have this debate. It's quite a old debate around public infrastructures and what is a natural monopoly, what has to be regulated when. And one of the opinions in this debate was then very strong as of the 1970s and is associated with Reagan and Thatcher, privatization, deregulation, and all that. Maybe an option is simply to do nothing. Maybe we have a core of high risk AI applications which have to be regulated, and we might feel always tempted also to regulate all the other things, but the outcome is always worse than a situation in which we do not regulate. It is more in the interest of the consumers and in the public discourse, and it is cheaper, and it keeps also the market more open if you do not start at all to regulate it. Leave it as it is with all its failures. It is better than to get all these other failures which are coming from this multiplication of acts which shall complement each other, and in the end no one knows exactly which act is regulating what. And for democracy, I think that is also not good. If only a few specialists in Brussels do understand which act is intended to regulate what, and a few lobbyists, maybe the ones from healthcare. I'm exaggerating now a little bit, but this is the big alternative to all the exercises we are doing here.
Are there any reactions to this?
When you talked about what actors were... Oh, no, continue, Sascha. Let Sascha go ahead. It's okay.
Please go ahead.
When you talked about one act regulating the next, we spent a lot of time really talking about the upcoming AI Act or the developing one, but we didn't really touch on the GDPR that much, and that's a big part of data that happened in the EU, and I think in the last few years. So I think there's some elements of that do contain like, the digital data, etc. But to what extent do consumers already have some protections? And I'm going to bring it to you because you're the legal expert. To what extent does the GDPR already cover some of these protections? Because I know there's different sections of it. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
The GDPR is covering a lot, especially of privacy-related related issues. It has also, I think it is the article 2022, where the human in the loop is necessary. Insofar, the GDPR is already backing up a lot what might also be behind these AI Act. And in that sense, you get a pattern which is indeed complementary. And we had this a couple of times today. But I think we have also to address the question, if we have this pattern or puzzle, it was even said it is a puzzle of, that might be true, but maybe it is a very complex puzzle. And the question, at least from a research point of view, I'm not overlooking how it really works, but is it in the interest of the people to have it so complex and so overlapping, which creates all kinds of loopholes? And you are also asking it: is it
necessary?
Is it now the GDPR? Is it now the AI Act? Is it maybe the Data Service Act? Where is this regulated? Oh, we have to look into the Annex number 2. Maybe this gives a little bit more light. And who is then comprehending all that? Maybe you and me, if we take time to look deep into that. But it is, I question how far this is inclusive. Maybe your organization is helping here, but it has also limited capacity. So this is these are very fundamental issues, which should not.
My question is, like, wouldn't it have been better to simply add another annex to the GDPR that specifically addressed AI as a new development that's a more becoming an important part of the GDPR? I asked this because years ago, I remember I was on Facebook and I uploaded a picture of a friend, and it asked me, do you want to tag XYZ? And I was like, how do they know it's this person? And that was the first time I realized that Facebook was using facial recognition. I didn't know that before. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that may still not know this, that they're uploading pictures of where they are and tagging themselves. So just my question is, like, and maybe the other panelists can also chime in, are we making it more complicated than it needs to be? If we keep on adding another act, we can simply amend it maybe, or add something else if it's something new to the development. I don't know if you guys understand my point here, so.
Thank you. I believe also Sascha wanted to contribute.
Yes.
No, it's really interesting, and I think you've kind of developed my thought as well. I mean, on the one hand, yes, I think you're right. Obviously, as an average Joe, as a consumer, citizen, or whatever, the more complex all this legislation is, the more difficult it is to understand. And particularly, I think the problem with the GDPR is also that different member states have transposed it slightly differently. And this, for example, in the context, again, of that European health data space, was one of the motivations to come out with the legislative proposal for the European health data space, to at least have some clarity about data protection and rights to first of all, access and share your personal health data within certain limits. At the same time, I would say, and I think Professor Heine, you also mentioned that the complexity can sometimes be counterproductive, so it could even work against inclusion. But I would say that at the same time, and this discussion being called a human rights-centered approach to artificial intelligence, I guess, like, who has most to lose if it's not regulated? And those are, from our perspective, those people who are already the most marginalized and excluded, who have problems accessing healthcare, social services, who are marginalized because of their gender, sexuality, ethnicity, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if things are not regulated, then those people will be the weakest in terms of seeking redress and obtaining that fairness and justice that we would like to go with these technological developments. and not only in healthcare, like throughout society, I would say.
Thank you so much. Unless, are there any reaction to this?
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, adding another annex to the GDPR to regulate AI, I think it's not efficient at all, because we have laws for specific purposes. In particular, those are, we call it lex specialis, because they regulate a specific sector that is personal data, once again. So putting AI regulation under the umbrella of AI, of the GDPR, would be a mistake, because AI is not just related to personal data. As Isabelle said before, it is a puzzle. It is a piece of a puzzle, and meaning just GDPR, it would be not, it wouldn't be efficient in protecting other rights that are related to the use of AI. In particular, for instance, the accountability and the liability on an artificial intelligence, which is something completely new in law that is not already enforced or experimented in the AI Act. And it will be an issue for us as lawyers to deal with it, because we can attribute a liability on a person or an individual, but it's very difficult to attribute any liability on something that is not human. And this issue is not to be fostered under the umbrella of GDPR, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. We have actually reached the end of the panel, so I will first of all I want to thank all the panelists, and then I wanted to just check really quick if there are any last remarks that you would like to provide to this panel. And I'll shut up right now, please, if you have any last remarks. Okay. Then it's great. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you all for being here. And we'll take a break, a 15-minute break right now. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
all of you that spent this day of very intense and rich, even more than debate, dialogue, as it was the purpose of the event in itself. Now we will have a very short overview of the key takeaways. I also invite particularly the people in the room this time, since it was heavily online, all the other sessions. If maybe you have some consideration, just a few seconds on what has been your, what you take away from this event. I will also briefly share the Howspace, which is the platform that we have used during the day. I have to say that in the morning session we had a bit more interactions also on the platform, so some of the content that I'm gonna share is gonna be more visually impactful. We decided to keep the platform open also in the next days, so that those who attended in person, online, can maybe review a bit of the event or come back there and write their comments on the platform, so that it's a richer output. And then the other thing that we will do will be to create a sort of working document that wrap up what has been discussed today. So let me share my screen. Hopefully it works. Okay. So now we will see visible in the platform the final takeaway page. So we have some word clouds that, as I said, are populated based on the conversations that we had. So the amount of, as we learned today, the amount of data that you put into artificial intelligence generates the content. So these were the word cloud of the expectations on AI. So the keywords somehow that were important for our participants. Then we have a second word cloud on the first session, AI and its interdisciplinary challenges. I mean, it's a very basic analysis at this stage, but I think it's nice to see how the word rights is kind of important, as well as with the same heaviness of policy. For me, it was particularly interesting to have the references to the regulations beyond the European Union, so the UNESCO framework, the OECD framework, which will be added in the background documents, where you already have the EU policy papers. We will add also this other documentation. I mean, there wasn't a lot of debate in the second session, but I think it was very interesting with Gaia Taffoni and Ella Jakubowska to look at the combination of the political and policy goals with the activation of participatory democracy instruments, so how citizens and civil society organizations can contribute to the policy-making process and play, if not full impact role in terms of achieving what they want to achieve, but at least an agenda-setting role and an indication for the institutions on the direction for the policy-making process. And then we have a bit of what had been said in the roundtable, but fortunately we have also the human intelligence beside the artificial intelligence with Franco to try to summarize what was discussed in the final session. In my opinion, what resonated with me, and as an activist what we will try to pursue, is everything that is related to open data, standardization of the data. I think is something that we can take out from the final roundtable, and the need to have data that are accessible for different stakeholders for different purposes. As mentioned, the Live Now page on the platform will stay open, and it will be possible to interact with the different sessions in the next days, so that we can enrich the content and work better on the final document. I will now leave the floor to Franco Donati for his own takeaways of the day. He was the scientific curator of this event, alongside with Marie Ronsmans, that as our project officer helped to put this together. So the floor to Franco for some lines of thinking and action, and then Marco Cappato for the conclusions.
Thank you, Virginia. Hopefully, I will give it justice. There were so many interesting insights that came out of the discussion. I think, rightly put, one of the very interesting aspects that I heard was the discussion on making as much, perhaps making data as available as possible, making it as open as possible, so that in a way things become transparent, but also data is also accessible by those parties in society that might not be able to typically have access to it, and the data is not in the hands of just a few interest groups with a lot of ability to actually make use of it. There was a very interesting conversation also on how specific policy frameworks or specific piece of legislation, for example, the Artificial Intelligence Act, are only a part of the bigger puzzle of legislation. And as a counterpoint, what was also very interesting was, well, but to what point is actually legislation useful? Perhaps also we can imagine a situation in which we legislate less, but we perhaps put systems in which we allow a system that evolves on its own and is able to actually provide as much as possible its benefits. Like a counterpoint to that was also very interesting was, well, but at the same time, if we're not very careful with legislating or not legislating, we might leave the people who are most vulnerable in society to not without the protection they so dearly need, and be left behind. And concerning being left behind, there was also an interesting conversation that was held on the digital divide, how certain parts of the globe, but also society, might not have access to the same technology. They might not have access to internet to the same extent that some other parts of the world and society might have access to. And there was a lot of conversations, also very interesting, on healthcare and how healthcare, but also like medical and biometric data can be used both to promote certain benefits for people, but also could have also some negative effects that need to be mitigated. I believe that is almost everything. I'm sure that I'm missing some points. So, if there is anything that I'm missing, please. The floor is yours.
Yes, and I suggest just a bit of visual. I really encourage everyone to use the time for still keeping the interaction open. Gaia Taffoni. I think you have to come here. Yes. Of course. Gaia Taffoni, he's a teaching assistant at the European University Institute and member of Science for Democracy.
Yeah, so I'm not wearing the hat of PQ with this intervention, but I think it was very provocative, the point of not regulating artificial intelligence at all, because so we end up not having too many rules, and then the idea of, yeah, but this is just a piece of a puzzle. But I was thinking, we still don't know what's going to happen with the Artificial Intelligence Act. We will see at the end of the process. But the idea is that, I mean, we hope for the actually better regulation tools and principles to really play a game also in a specific case, because we said it's I mean, the topic is really is centered around human rights and flows that might actually are there and might still be there. So better regulation leads to evidence-based regulation, one of the pillars. But also, I think with the Artificial Intelligence Act, we have experimental regulation. So it's the first time that the Commission is allowing member states to, for instance, set up regulatory sandboxes. So there is also, I think, a lot of hope in how these tools will be actually implemented. So experimental regulation, consultation, so stakeholders' inputs, this really brings some hope that the regulation is going to be flexible and human-centered, hopefully, also thanks to these tools that will be that will be used for this new regulation of artificial intelligence. So this is
Thank
my
you very
point.
much.
Sorry.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. I don't know if there is any other comment. Otherwise, Marco Cappato, co-founder of Science for Democracy and treasurer of
Thank you, Virginia. Well, I was thinking about the title of our event, a human-centered artificial intelligence. And Professor at the beginning said, well, a human-centered is not really a legal expression, it's more a political expression. This is true and not true. It's true, of course, because human can have a much broader meaning, but at the same time there is a very strictly legal way of reading this word, which is compatible with human rights, with fundamental human rights. So, but at the same time, we discussed a lot about regulation, and even if I have a political background, maybe I think that we could think about the fact that regulation is not the whole thing. For example, there are two huge issues that come to my mind are education and investment. Artificial intelligence literacy. For example, Finland, as far as I know, maybe there are some countries which are more advanced than Finland, but as far as I know, they created a huge program of artificial intelligence literacy in schools, but also about small and medium enterprises to help, I don't know, the bread maker or the hairdresser to understand how to use artificial intelligence, not just big and somehow I think the smart idea in Finland, I read it in newspapers, so I don't have any special insight and connection in Finland, but what seemed to me smart was the political idea. In Finland we don't have a big tech company. We will never be able to be competitive in the hard data science. We don't have this kind of power of giant tech companies, but we have a very strong education system, and what we could be more competitive than others would not be in creating artificial intelligence industry, but in exploiting artificial intelligence based services. I think it seemed to me, I don't know enough to say the move is successful or will be successful, but as a reasonment, it seems to me a quite wise reasonment. And this reasonment probably have some implication in very concrete terms on the issue of who are the owners of data, public data, private data, because the bread maker will never build his own artificial intelligence system to understand when he has to cook big bread or small bread and so on. But maybe if he's connected or if she is connected with the network of bread maker, this could touch the level, how do you say in this case, the quantity, the dimension needed, the scale needed to exploit artificial intelligence. On the other side, there is this huge point of investment. Of course, investment also in education, because one of the one of the recipes of the Chinese success with artificial intelligence, one is a very small privacy regulation, which enable Chinese company to harvest enormous amount of data that luckily in Europe we would never be allowed to exploit. But on the other side, there is a huge investment in engineer technology, engineer academy in school, in having hundreds of thousands of engineers, and this can have a huge impact in the development of artificial intelligence technology. On the other side, technology, I think, is also important, and I come to a point that I put at the beginning. When we talk about using new technologies to reinforce democracy and civil and political rights, this will not be something coming from the market, because nobody is gaining money from having people participating to the public discourse or to public decision. There is no money implied. So if there is no investment by the state in using technology to help citizens to participate to democracy, nobody will do it. I think this is something important, because it will not come neither from the market, neither from regulation. It's not only a problem of regulation. Yes, you could have regulation, for example, allowing, as in Italy we fought for using digital signature to subscribe referendum, or having a public platform to interact with the public. This can carry also regulation part, but the big part of it would be a problem of priority in investment. So I think that to get this result of a more human-centered artificial intelligence, we cannot concentrate only on the regulation of artificial intelligence. We should also tackle the issue of education and investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco Cappato. So maybe a few words on Sense for Democracy activities, and we then really move to the serious part of the evening.
So yes, this event was organized by Science for Democracy, as you know, which is an organization that promotes the right to science, so access to scientific knowledge, the enjoyment of scientific knowledge. It was possible also because we are based partly here in the Netherlands, but also in Belgium and Italy, and also we have some members in Germany. So we are very pan-European, trying to be actually international organization, with some members also in the United States, for example, in South America. So this is really, these type of activities are very important, and they're the very fuel for these organizations, and we're really thankful for your participation, and yeah, we look forward to other events like this, where we can get your inputs and your insights into how we can make science much more relevant in the policy debate, but also much more relevant for people overall. Thank you.
Thank you, Franco. Thanks to all of us, those who followed online, those who will re-watch the recordings. So the appointment now is at 5:30 at Café Schlemmer for a drink, a bit of relaxing. Thanks everyone for being with us today, and see you soon, online, offline, or both. Thanks a lot. And thanks to Vincenzo, Carlo, Marie, John, and all the tech team that made this possible, and the House of Europe for having us.
Marie, yeah.